A slot machine in Las Vegas starts spitting out coins, not a jackpot animation, not flashing lights, just an endless metallic waterfall pouring onto the casino floor. Across the country, a group of drivers stand outside a fenced scrapyard watching the cars they once loved being crushed into flat sheets of metal. Decades earlier, a quiet meeting takes place in Geneva. Executives sit around a long wooden table, not discussing how to improve light bulbs, but how to make them last shorter. All of these inventions had one thing in common. They worked, sometimes brilliantly, and that was the problem. We're told innovation is always rewarded, that if something is efficient enough, useful enough, or revolutionary enough, it will survive. History suggests something more complicated, because sometimes an invention doesn't fail. It crosses a line, and when it does, the system pushes back. If you're curious about the hidden side of progress, the inventions that almost changed everything, consider subscribing. This channel explores the strange tension between innovation and power. And today's countdown only gets more unsettling as we go. Segment 8. The light wand casinos operate on a simple assumption. The house always wins. Slot machines in the 1980s looked mechanical and harmless from the outside. Spinning reels, blinking lights, trays clinking with coins. But inside, they relied on optical sensors to count each coin as it dropped through a payout chute. Those sensors were designed to track exactly how much money had been dispensed. The common belief was that manipulating a slot machine required inside access, complicated hacking, or physical tampering. The reality was much simpler. Light. The device, later nicknamed the light wand, was essentially a small flashlight with a modified tip. When aimed precisely into the optical payout sensor during a coin release, the bright beam could temporarily overwhelm the sensor. Coins would continue dropping, but the machine wouldn't register that it had paid anything out. From the machine's internal accounting, nothing had happened, so it kept dispensing. Reports from the era describe scammers moving between machines, draining hoppers while casino staff struggled to understand why revenue was suddenly collapsing. At first, operators suspected mechanical defects, then software glitches. Eventually, they realized something more troubling. Their multi-million-dollar systems had a blind spot. The response was swift. Manufacturers redesigned machines with better shielding, electronic monitoring, and more secure payout tracking. Law enforcement stepped in. Using or even possessing such a device became a serious criminal offense. A $10 tool triggered a technological arms race. It revealed a pattern we'll see again in this countdown. Even powerful systems can be undone by simple ideas, especially when those ideas exploit how the system actually works. But casinos weren't the only institutions vulnerable to mathematics and probability, because in the 1970s, two professors decided to bring a computer into a blackjack game. Segment 7. The card counter computer. Blackjack has always carried a quiet myth. If you're smart enough, disciplined enough, you can beat the house. Card counting isn't illegal, it's simply math, tracking which cards have been played to estimate the probability of what remains in the deck. But casinos rely on another assumption. Humans get tired. Humans make mistakes. Humans hesitate. In the 1970s, two mathematicians, Claude Shannon and Edward Thorpe, decided to remove the weakest link from the equation, the human brain. They built what is widely considered one of the earliest wearable computers. It was small enough to be hidden in a shoe. Switches were placed under the player's toes. An earpiece receiver delivered subtle signals. As cards were dealt, the operator would tap in values using their toes. Inside the shoe, the device calculated probabilities in real time. When the odds shifted in the player's favor, the earpiece would signal them to increase their bet. It didn't cheat the deck. It didn't manipulate the cards. It simply removed human error, and that made it dangerously effective. When tested in casinos, the system reportedly performed exactly as expected. It demonstrated something unsettling for the gambling industry. With enough computational assistance, the house edge could be neutralized. The device wasn't illegal at the time. There were no laws against electronic aids in gambling, so the law changed. In 1985, Nevada made it illegal to use electronic devices to assist in casino games. The invention forced regulators to catch up with technology. Today, similar wearable computing concepts exist in smartwatches and health trackers, but its early ancestor wasn't built for fitness. It was built to exploit probability. In this case, the system reacted by rewriting the rules, but sometimes the system resists something even more fundamental than math. Sometimes it resists physics itself. Segment 6. The V-style ski jump. For decades, ski jumping looked the same. Athletes launched off the ramp with their skis perfectly parallel, two straight lines slicing through the air. It was considered proper form, elegant, correct. Judges even awarded style points based on how clean and controlled the technique looked. The assumption was simple: if everyone is doing it this way, it must be the best way. Then in the 1980s, a Swedish jumper named Jan Boklov did something that looked completely wrong. Instead of keeping his skis parallel, he spread them apart into a V-shape mid-flight. It looked awkward, unbalanced, almost clumsy. At first, judges penalized him. They deducted style points. Officials disliked how it looked, but there was a problem. He kept flying farther than everyone else. The mechanism wasn't magic, it was aerodynamics. By spreading the skis into a V shape, the jumper increased surface area and created a low-pressure pocket of air between the skis. That pocket generated additional lift, similar in principle to how an airplane wing functions. More lift meant longer flights. Even with lower style scores, jumpers using the V technique began outperforming traditional competitors by margins of up to 10 to 15%, a massive difference in a sport measured in meters. At first, the establishment resisted. The technique was mocked. Judges tried to discourage it through scoring, but physics doesn't respond to tradition. Eventually, the distances became undeniable. Ski hills had to be redesigned because athletes were overshooting safe landing zones. The technique that once looked incorrect became universal. Today, every professional ski jumper uses the V style. In this case, the system didn't destroy the invention, it adapted to it. But outside of sports, especially in media, adaptation is often replaced with litigation, because in 1999, a teenager discovered how to unlock every DVD in the world. Segment 5. DCSS, the code that unlocked DVDs. In the late 1990s, DVDs were marketed as secure. Studios assured audiences that the Content Scramble System, CSS, protected films from unauthorized copying. The assumption was clear: digital locks were permanent. If you bought a DVD, you could watch it, but you couldn't freely copy or redistribute it. In 1999, a Norwegian teenager named John Lech Johansen wanted something simple. He wanted to watch his legally purchased DVDs on a Linux computer. There was just one problem: no licensed DVD player software existed for Linux at the time. So he and a small group of programmers reverse engineered the encryption. The result was DCSS, a small piece of code that bypassed the DVD's encryption system and allowed the video to be decoded. Technically, it didn't destroy DVDs. It didn't even modify them. It simply unlocked what was already there. And it worked. Once DCSS was released online, anyone could use it to create perfect digital copies of their movies. Hollywood executives reacted quickly. Lawsuits were filed. Websites hosting the code were targeted under the newly passed Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The assumption had been that encryption could control distribution. The flip was uncomfortable. If encryption is implemented in consumer hardware, someone can eventually study it, replicate it, and break it. The legal battles that followed weren't just about piracy, they were about control. Courts ruled against distributing the software in the United States. But by then, the code had already spread globally. It appeared mirrored on countless servers. It was even printed on t-shirts and encoded into other creative forms as a protest against censorship. The attempt to suppress it revealed something new about digital information. Once released, it becomes extremely difficult to contain. This invention wasn't physically crushed. It wasn't regulated out of existence. It exposed a structural weakness in digital control, and that made industries nervous. But if unlocking movies caused panic, what happens when you eliminate the advertisements that pay for television entirely? Segment 4. Replay TV, the commercial skipper. Television has always followed a simple economic rule. Content is funded by advertising. You don't pay directly for every show you watch on broadcast TV. Advertisers do. In exchange, you watch commercials. That's the trade. By the early 2000s, digital video recorders were becoming common. Devices like TiVo allowed viewers to record programs and manually fast-forward through ads. That was already inconvenient for networks. Then, in 2001, a company called Sonic Blue released the Replay TV 4000. It didn't just let you fast-forward. It automatically skipped commercials. The assumption had always been that ads were unavoidable. Even if you recorded a show, you still had to manually skip them. Replay TV changed that. Using pattern recognition and timing analysis, the device detected commercial breaks and jumped past them seamlessly. Viewers could watch entire programs without interruption. To television networks, this wasn't just a feature, it was a threat. If large numbers of viewers skipped ads automatically, advertising revenue could decline significantly. The business model of free broadcast television depended on attention. Sonic Blue was sued by major networks and content companies. The lawsuits argued that automatic ad skipping undermined the economics of television and enabled content sharing. Legal costs mounted. Eventually, Sonic Blue filed for bankruptcy. The company that acquired its assets removed the commercial skipping features. The technology worked. That was precisely the issue. The mechanism was simple: remove friction from avoiding ads. The consequence was systemic: challenge the revenue stream itself. And when revenue streams are challenged, the response can be swift. But skipping ads was still operating within the broadcast system. What happens when someone tries to bypass cable television entirely, legally? Segment 3. Aereo, the $8 antenna revolution. By 2012, cable television had become expensive. Monthly bills often exceeded $100. Yet much of the content, local news, network shows, sports, was technically broadcast over public airwaves, free to anyone with an antenna. The assumption was simple: if you wanted convenient access on your phone or laptop, you needed a cable subscription. A startup called Aereo questioned that. Their idea was unusual but legally strategic. Inside a warehouse, Aereo installed thousands of tiny antennas, each roughly the size of a dime. When a customer signed up, they were assigned one individual antenna. That antenna captured free over-the-air broadcast signals. Aereo then streamed that signal to the customer's device over the internet. The company argued that it wasn't a cable provider. It was simply renting antennas and DVR space to individuals. Technically, each user had their own antenna. They were just accessing it remotely. The service cost about $8 per month. It worked. Customers could watch live broadcast television on smartphones and laptops without paying traditional cable fees. Broadcast networks reacted immediately. Lawsuits followed. The argument was that Aereo functioned like a cable company and should pay retransmission fees. In 2014, the case reached the US Supreme Court. The court ruled against Aereo, stating that its model was too similar to a cable system. Shortly after, Aereo filed for bankruptcy. The mechanism was clever legal engineering. The consequence was legal reclassification. The invention didn't malfunction. It didn't deceive customers. It exploited a structural gap in how broadcast law was written. And when it challenged the established revenue model, the law adapted. Sometimes technology exposes weaknesses in business models. Other times, it reveals something more unsettling. The technology doesn't always improve over time. Sometimes, it's deliberately held back. Segment 2. The Phoebus Cartel. We're used to thinking of technology as a steady upward curve. Phones get faster, cars get safer, batteries last longer. The assumption is that durability improves naturally over time. But in the 1920s, something unusual happened in the light bulb industry. By that point, engineers were already capable of manufacturing bulbs that lasted 2,000 hours, even more. In fact, one bulb, known as the Centennial Light in California, has reportedly been burning for over a century. Longer lifespan was technically possible, and that created a problem. If light bulbs lasted too long, people would buy fewer of them. In 1924, major manufacturers from Europe and the United States formed an agreement known as the Phoebus Cartel. Companies including General Electric, Osram, and Philips coordinated to standardize bulb lifespan at around 1,000 hours. They created testing committees. If a company produced bulbs that lasted longer than the agreed limit, it could be fined. In other words, manufacturers were penalized for making products that were too durable. The mechanism wasn't technological failure. It was coordinated limitation. The consequence was profound. The concept of planned obsolescence, designing products with intentionally limited lifespans, became embedded in modern manufacturing culture. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about legal gray areas. It was about controlling durability to stabilize revenue. Technology didn't regress because it had to. It was adjusted because it was economically inconvenient. And sometimes, inconvenience isn't solved quietly through agreements. Sometimes, it's solved by physically eliminating the product itself. Segment 1. The GMEV1. By the late 1990s, electric cars weren't science fiction. They were on the road. The General Motors EV1 was sleek, quiet, and fully electric. Drivers who leased it described it as futuristic. Smooth acceleration, no gasoline stops, no engine noise. The assumption was straightforward. If consumers love a product, the company will keep selling it. The EV1 challenged that assumption. It wasn't sold outright. It was only available through lease agreements. Around 1,100 units were produced and distributed, primarily in California and Arizona. People who drove them often wanted to keep them, but after a few years, General Motors made a decision. The leases would not be renewed. The vehicles would be recalled. Customers protested. Some offered to buy their cars outright. Others staged demonstrations outside GM facilities. They argued that the vehicles were functioning, safe, and wanted. The mechanism behind the recall was contractual. Because the cars were leased, GM retained ownership. The consequence was visible. Most of the EV1s were transported to facilities and crushed. Images of compact electric cars flattened in the scrap metal became symbolic of something larger, a stalled electric future. General Motors stated that the program was unprofitable and that demand was limited. Critics argued that the car disrupted traditional automotive and service models. Regardless of interpretation, one fact remained. The EV1 worked. It proved that a modern electric vehicle was viable decades before widespread adoption. And yet, instead of evolving naturally in the marketplace, it disappeared. Across these 8 cases, the pattern shifts slightly each time. Sometimes the invention exposed a technical vulnerability. Sometimes it challenged a scoring tradition. Sometimes it bypassed a revenue stream. Sometimes it threatened a manufacturing norm. And sometimes it simply arrived before the system was ready to accommodate it. If you've made it this far and you're interested in more stories about how technology reshapes and sometimes collides with power structures, consider subscribing. These patterns repeat more often than we realize. Innovation isn't just about what's possible. It's about what fits within existing systems. And when something works too well, whether it's a $10 flashlight, a warehouse of antennas, or a silent electric car, the reaction can reveal as much about the system as the invention itself. The question isn't just which of these was most effective. It's this: what invention today is quietly pushing against the same invisible boundary?